All right, so we have our cute little foldable made, and we're going to talk about trig ratios. This is actually pretty much all a review from geometry, but may have been a while. That's okay. So I added this cute little picture to mine. You're welcome to pause and add it to yours. You don't have to. Have fun. A reminder of what the Pythagorean theorem is. Anytime I have a right triangle, I can do a squared plus b squared equals c squared, where c is the hypotenuse or the longest side. I did some math there for you. So 4x squared plus x squared equals 5x squared. 5 squared. Words are hard. Try again. So to get x by itself, I'm going to subtract 4 squared. 25 minus 16 is 9. I take the square root and I get 3. But sometimes we need trig because we're not given enough information to always use the Pythagorean theorem. Okay, so what are our ratios? You may recall SOHCAHTOA. You want to remember SOHCAHTOA as your acronym there, where sine and cosine and theta are our 3 trig functions. If you see this little symbol, it means theta, and it's a popular Greek symbol to denote angles. The hypotenuse is always straight across from the right angle, therefore making it the largest angle, or the largest side. Opposite is opposite of the angle, and adjacent is the one that is right next to the angle that is not the hypotenuse. And so for our little trig, memory trick, we use sine as opposite over hypotenuse, cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse, and then tangent is opposite over adjacent. Right? We use trig ratios only with right triangles. So if it's not a right triangle, we're not using this. We only use the acute angles when doing calculations. So for instance, we're going to go through all of these ratios. I'm going to try to do them as quick as I can, but still efficiently. So here's A. Across from that is the opposite. Across from the right angle is the hypotenuse. So sine of A is 11 over 13. Let's do the same thing, but with B this time. Now the opposite of B is 12. Hypotenuse is still 13, so altogether it's 12 out of 13. Okay. What about cosine of A? So the adjacent is 12 now. Hypotenuse is still 13, so it's 12 thirteenths. Do it the other way. So cosine of B is 11 over 13 for the adjacent over hypotenuse. Go back to A. The opposite is across the way is 11. The adjacent is 12. And for tangent of B, 12 over 11. So hopefully as I was going through that, you were already noticing a pattern there. But for sine and cosine, the sine of A is equal to the cosine of B. So if I think about this being 90 degrees, I think about the whole triangle be 180. That means if this is 90, then these two angles must add up to 90 as well to get the 180. We'll circle back on that, but think about that. That means that angle A and angle B must add up to 90 degrees. All right, so calculator, you are welcome to use a scientific. You are welcome to use a graphing calculator. You are welcome to use Desmos. Number one thing is make sure you are in degrees. If you are not in degrees, you will not get the right answer. My little trick here is to use desmos.com/scientific because it's automatically in degrees. When you go there, it's very obvious that you're in degrees. It's got a little toggle button there for you to go back and forth, but degrees is the default. If you are graphing, the default is radians, so it will not give you the right answer unless you purposely change it, and you can change it by hitting the little settings gear up in the top right. All right, so these are straight calculator strokes. So type it in your calculator, see if you get the matching answer. That's all there is to it. Tangent of 42 is a decimal. Sine of 48 is a decimal. Now notice here, sine of 48 is equal to cosine of what? Well, think about that last slide. Sine and cosine of A and B are equal as long as A plus B equals 90. So 48 plus what equals 90? That's 42. Okay, so that's 0.7431. Cosine of 23 must be equal to sine of what? So 90 minus 23 gives me 67 degrees, which is 0.9205. All right, there's a few vocabulary terms. It's good to know that a ratio is a fraction, that altitude is the height. Angle of elevation, you're talking about being on the ground, and the angle looking up is your angle of elevation. For angle of depression, you're like looking out and then down. So it's this angle that I'm creating here. That one always confuses people. Angle of elevation, most people get correct. Depression, some people do backwards. All right, so now this is the bulk of it. This is what you will use most often. Let's solve. If I want to find side A, and I think about what I'm given, I am given angle A, and little a is the opposite, and the other piece of information that I know, see, I don't know anything about that, so that's not going to help me for the first question. I know that the hypotenuse is 20. So I need the opposite, I know the hypotenuse. Opposite hypotenuse, SOHCAHTOA, that's sine. So I set that up as such. Sine of 38 degrees equals A divided by 20. So equals the opposite divided by the hypotenuse. Then I go back to, algebra 2 skills at most, and maybe algebra 1, just with trig functions. If A is being divided by 20, to get it by itself, I'm going to multiply by 20. I'm then going to type this in my calculator to get approximately 12.3 centimeters. Now, again, type this in your calculator. Make sure that the steps make sense. If not, ask questions. All right, so for side B, this time I don't know B, but I still know the hypotenuse, and I still know angle A. So this time, adjacent hypotenuse cosine is the winning trig function, and it's going to be B over 20. Multiply both sides by 20. Type this part in my calculator, and I get 15.8 centimeters. Now, when you type that in your calculator, it's not going to show you 15.8. It's going to show you a big, long decimal. That's fine. We're just rounding to the nearest 10. All right, 2 more pages in the book. What about angles? What do we do when we have angles? So I'm wanting to know what angle A is. I know what the opposite is. I know what the hypotenuse is. So I set up the same type of equation. Sine A equals 4 over 12. To get A by itself, I have to do the inverse of A. Or the inverse of sine. And you're like, well, what is that? Because, the inverse of adding is subtracting. The inverse of multiplying is dividing. The inverse of squaring is square rooting. The inverse of sine is something called sine inverse. Okay, it's sine raised to the -1. There's an actual button on all calculators. So you're not just typing sine to the -1, although that will probably work. In Desmos, you're actually finding that button. You type all this in. Again, make sure you're in degree, because if you're not, it will not give you the correct answer of approximately 19 degrees. Again, that's rounded. All right, for angle B, some of you may be like, well, I know what angle A is. I can find angle B. Yes, but let's do it with trig to make sure that that's what we get. So I'm looking at B here. I know the hypotenuse. I know the adjacent. So this time I'm going to use cosine. So cosine B equals 4 over 12. So that means B must equal cosine inverse of 4 over 12. And when I type that in my calculator, I get approximately 71 degrees. You should notice that 19 plus 71 are complementary angles because they add up to 90 degrees. So that's taking you back to geometry a little bit. last slide of a word problem and you are finished. All right, you have an airplane that's taking off. The angle of elevation is measuring 40 degrees. What is the horizontal distance of the plane if the altitude is 2 miles? So remember, altitude is the height. So 2 miles. We want to know the horizontal distance. Yes, I guess technically we're talking about up there, but remember that's going to be the same length as whatever it is down here. So I am given the opposite over adjacent. So that's going to be tangent of 40 equals 2 over x. Okay. Multiply both sides by x because I'm trying to get x by itself. So I have to do 2 steps here. I got to get an x over and then divide. And so what I'm typing in my calculator is this right here. 2 divided by tangent 40. 2 divided by tangent 40 will give you the answer, which is approximately 2.38 miles. Again, type that in your calculator. Make sure that you can get that.